I'm Douglas Clark. I've been on death row for 13 years, been involved in this case since Carol Bundy accused me of her crimes, which were a copycat of this book, since 1980, August 11th. I was 32 when I was arrested, a happy-go-lucky bachelor, chasing skirts in LA, having a good time.
One of the country's most depraved serial killers died behind bars last week while awaiting execution. Douglas Clark was one half of the Sunset Strip killers. He and Carol Bundy were like the Bonnie and Clyde of 1980, only their list of crimes were far more gruesome because aside from being a murderer, Douglas Clark was a necrophile. Now, I am not saying serial killers have a look, but if you ask me, this guy's last mugshot is terror-inducing. Doug Clark had been in prison in California since 1983. On October 11th, he died of natural causes at the age of 75. What this guy was convicted of is grisly. Clark was serving 6 consecutive death sentences for first-degree murder, as well as an additional 12 years for attempted first-degree murder, and another 8 months for having sex with a corpse. He was also convicted of mayhem, but that one was stayed by the court, according to the Department of Corrections. Clark committed these atrocities alongside his partner in crime, Carol Bundy. These two, who became known as the Sunset Strip Killers, terrorized Los Angeles in the summer of 1980. Had the pair not been caught, I can't fathom how far their killing spree would have stretched. The Sunset Strip Killers were only active during a few-month period. They went down for collectively killing 7 people, 6 women and 1 man, but it's believed that they may have had twice as many victims. The Sunset Strip is an iconic portion of the famed Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. It's brimming with restaurants, comedy clubs, boutiques, and home to the famous Chateau Marmont. Back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the Sunset Strip music scene was legendary. The Whiskey A Go-Go, Viper Room, Roxy, all seminal rock and roll music venues were dotted along the Sunset Strip. It was against this glittering backdrop that Douglas Clark and Carol Bundy would enact a series of gruesome and shocking murders that struck fear into the heart of Hollywood. The crimes committed by the Sunset Strip Killers are among the most grotesque that I've ever covered, so consider this your content warning. Things are about to get very dark and very twisted. Clark was born in the late 1940s and was raised in a military family, so they moved around quite a bit, all across the US and in places like Switzerland and India. By his late 20s, early 30s, he had settled in the Los Angeles area and kind of bopped around from job to job. But he spent a lot of his time lurking in bars, trying to swindle lonely older women out of cash, and by many accounts, he was quite successful at it. Louise Farr, who authored a book on Clark and Bundy called The Sunset Murders, told the LA Times he was very good at murmuring in women's ears in country bars and getting them to sleep with him and give him a place to stay. He was essentially a leech. Now, he was acting out one such scenario in 1979 when he first came across Carol Bundy. Unbeknownst to him at the time, Carol would become far more than just a short-lived meal ticket. She would join him on a violent crime spree that would claim the lives of innocent women and young girls. Now, it's not my place to comment on anyone's physical appearance, but I'm going to. Here, Carol Bundy was not what you would call a looker, and the only reason I bring this up is because it is actually germane to the story. Carol had been in a string of bad marriages, she was a little overweight, and quite a bit older than Clark, 37 to his 31. Those things combined to kind of give her poor self-esteem and make her infatuated with him. And according to investigators, it was that infatuation that fed her desire to do whatever it took to please him. Their joint crimes began not long after he had first targeted her that night in a North Hollywood bar. Clark quickly moved into her apartment in the Valley, and there he set his sights on an 11-year-old little girl who lived next door. Together, Clark and Bundy lured in the child and began sexually molesting her and documenting it with photographs. Things then progressed out of the apartment and onto the Sunset Strip. In the book, Evil Serial Killers in the Minds of Monsters, author Charlotte Gregg wrote that Clark revealed to Carol Bundy he had a desire to escalate from molestation to killing, telling her that he wanted to do it while raping the victims to feel, quote, vaginal contractions during the death spasms. And rather than being horrified, Bundy became a willing and, by all accounts, enthusiastic participant. Now, we know of 6 victims of the Sunset Strip Killer, but like I said earlier, there are believed to be many, many more. The majority of the victims were young women, several of whom were prostitutes. And we know from covering cases like Joel Rifkin and Gilgo Beach, being a sex worker does make for easy prey. When bodies and body parts started popping up during the summer of 1980, the LAPD knew they had a serial killer on their hands. Gina Nerano and Cynthia Chandler were runaways and stepsisters. They were abducted together, shot together, and their bodies dumped together inside of a garage. They were also victims of Clark's psychosexual fantasies and made to perform sex acts on each other and him prior to their murders. During a prelim hearing, a witness testified that Clark had admitted to the killings of Gina and Cynthia and that he said he had sex with both of the girls' corpses. The victims, all of them, were shot with the same gun, most of them sexually assaulted, though it's unclear if those assaults were pre- or post-mortem or both. During court, the prosecution offered up several letters to the jury from Clark that discussed his predilection for necrophilia. 20-year-old Exie Wilson was sexually assaulted, shot in the head, and then decapitated. Her head was later found inside of a wooden box dumped in an alleyway, and the severed head was wrapped in a t-shirt that had the words "Daddy's Girl" emblazoned on the front. Now, if you're not already sickened by this story, here's the worst bit of what happened to Exie Wilson. Carol Bundy told authorities that one night Clark brought home the severed head of one of his victims, who we now know was Exie Wilson. Bundy admitted that they kept the head in the freezer and only took it out so Clark could sexually gratify himself with it. And Carol Bundy was not just a bystander. For her part, she treated the head like a mannequin and applied makeup to Exie's dismembered face. Kim Cresswell's book, Murder on Sunset Strip, quoted Bundy as telling authorities, "Where I had my fun was with the makeup. I was making her over like a big Barbie doll." Late in the summer, it was Bundy who started to come unglued. She let slip to her former lover and apartment manager, Jack Murray, that Clark was butchering women and she was involved. But regret for this immediately set in. To get herself out of that mess and prevent Murray from going to the cops with the information, Bundy quickly concocted a plan. She lured him into a van with the promise of sex and then shot him and decapitated him for good measure with a boning knife. Just a few days later, though, she confessed to coworkers that she had killed Murray, and from there, things just unraveled quickly. The Sunset Strip killers were soon arrested. After their arrest, Carol Bundy immediately started to play it like she had been an unwilling participant in the torture and killings of the female victims. Meanwhile, Clark, who briefly represented himself in court, was the one telling the jury that he was manipulated by Carol and that she and Jack were the ones who actually carried out the slayings. If you ask me, they were both liars, and law enforcement didn't buy it either, particularly since when Bundy confessed to killing Jack Murray, she told police, quote, "I don't know if you guys have ever in your life shot anybody, but it's really fun to do. It sounds terrible, but it is." Now, Carol Bundy avoided a death sentence by taking a plea deal for Murray's murder. She was given life in prison and died behind bars in 2003 at 61 years old. Douglas Clark, he was another story. His trial was an absolute spectacle. He would have profanity-laden outbursts in the courtroom, throw tantrums, and like Ted Bundy, he represented himself for a time. And during cross-examination of an alleged victim who had gotten away, she told the jury that she was so scared of Doug Clark that she had to move, to which Doug Clark told her in open court he had her new address. So the judge eventually stopped allowing him to act as his own attorney. Now, when he died on October 11th, Douglas Clark had been on death row for 40 years. But despite being a condemned man, his execution was never really looming. And while capital punishment is still legal in the state of California, no prisoner has been executed in the last 2 decades. And earlier this year, Governor Gavin Newsom enacted a moratorium halting all future executions. For more true crime content like this, hit like and subscribe.